Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are doing today the 14th episode of En Orden Libertad for the Spanish newspaper Navarra Confidencial. As you know, I'm your host. My name is Ugo Stornaiolo. I am the international correspondent for Navarra Confidencial. And today joining me is David Wemhoff, who is an American lawyer who's also a Catholic writer. He has argued several important cases, taught a couple law courses uh, at university level, and he's joining us today to talk about law and Christianity, among other things. So, welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me, Ugo. It's great to be here.
All right, so our first question usually is for our guests to introduce themselves. So I already did a little intro, but if you could speak about yourself some more, that would be great as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm an American lawyer, like you said. So that explains a lot. But I'm also Catholic. I'm from the United States. I'm from Indiana. I grew up in Indiana, went to the University of Notre Dame. I got a degree in government. After that, I spent a little bit of time in the Army. Then I went to law school. And in law school, I studied and received a JD, a Juris Doctor, and got into the civil practice of law and then ultimately into the criminal practice of law. And now I'm transitioning into the international understanding of law, if you will. I'm not quite sure how much I'll practice it, but I'm learning, and I'm trying to teach and spread knowledge as much as I can through the Federal Bar Association, which is an association over here in the United States of professionals. We have an international law section, which deals with international law and deals with American law interfacing with international law and so on and so forth. Some of the things that I've done is, like you've said, I've done some writing. I wrote a book called John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. It's out in a second edition. You can get it on Amazon. It's a 2-volume work. I don't know if you can see it here. Maybe not. There we go.
Yeah.
Two-volume work is volume 1. It's over 1,000 pages total. It's got about 500 different references. And what it deals with is it deals with the doctrinal or the ideological warfare program that was set in motion by the United States government in conjunction with the powerful private interests or the elites in America following World War II. Now, the architect of that program was Edward Lilly, Dr. Edward Lilly. He was a Catholic, and he was a Catholic scholar, and he was a Catholic teacher at Catholic University of America. So to me, it's an interesting proposition, the American proposition, because it's based largely on the First Amendment. And this is what the American media and American psyops pushed around the world for a very long time. And there's, we're still doing it. They're still doing it. They're still pushing around. And so what the First Amendment does, it establishes the liberal order, because it disestablishes religion as the basis of your laws, and it disestablishes any sort of church as some kind of arbiter in society. It also gives really control of the culture to the powerful private interests, who then come to determine the values and the beliefs. The private interests, ultimately the economic and the social interests. And so what happened is that in the church, there's always been a division. This division has always been, is the liberal order a good way to order the church and a good way to order society? Or should we stick with, ordering things in accordance with the Catholic Church, in accordance with Christianity and Catholicism? And so, the Americans are smart. We're smart, okay? And we know how to see the differences and how to exploit those differences. And that's what happened after World War II. Those differences were exploited. And what you had going around the world, with ground zero being Rome, where I think that's where you are, right?
No, I'm living in Poland right now. So,
Oh, you're
yeah,
in
very
Poland.
Christian Poland.
Oh, okay.
Very
I didn't know
Catholic
that.
country. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So,
Well, but you're from Italy. So Italy was ground
yeah.
zero. Italy was ground zero. The doctrinal warfare, the Pro-Deo University is where everybody was taught basically the First Amendment is the best way to order your society. And most of these people who were being taught that were the business leaders, the academic leaders from Latin America and from other Catholic countries. So that is what I wrote. And then I have the American proposition. And I practice law. I do mostly federal criminal defense right now, but I've also taught the American constitutional law and federal criminal law. So that's kind of a thumbnail of what I do.
Okay, well, thank you for the good intro. So yeah, I mean, for the people who know you, well, you're quite a well-known person with Catholic legal circles, especially because of your book and because of your practice. Um, in that sense, I wanted to ask you, like, first question: how do you deal being a Catholic lawyer in the United States? Because, well, the legal profession tends to be quite secular, for one. Right now, there's a lot of influence, especially from diversity people, liberal ideologues. As someone who has studied at CAU, at Catholic University of America, someone who is right now living in a very Catholic country like Poland, and coming from Latin America as well, where I was born and raised, even if I'm Italian. I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack, especially from the American side. And I mean, in my experience, even if there are like nominally Catholic institutions, and there are people who are very invested in the promotion of traditional and of religious values in the legal profession, there's always this um, conflict. There's always this contention about what we believe and what we are actually doing as lawyers. So I want to ask you your opinion on that.
Well, there's a little book that was put out by Father Francis Connell. I think it was around 1955. And I want to make sure I get the title right. It's Morals in Politics and Professions, a Guide for Catholics in Public Life by Father Francis Connell. He was a Redemptorist. He was writing in the 1950s here in the United States. And he said, Catholics have got to act justly. You got to follow the precepts of St. Thomas Aquinas. You can't take unjust causes. You can't lie. You can't be motivated, solely by wanting to make money. You have to lead an exemplary life and a moral life, and you have to give an example to all by your life. So let's talk about unjust causes. So supporting, abortion rights or supporting gay marriage, those are unjust causes. That's not a law. That's a tyrannical edict. And you can't support that as a Catholic. I can't support that. I don't support that. There's no way you can. So what you do is, and what I have done is I've given a lot of time, and this has been years now ago, I gave a lot of time to the pro-life cause. I served in different capacities in pro-life organizations. And also I represented people in litigation having to deal with pro-life issues. I am on record as advocating for either the amendment of the Constitution to either change the First Amendment or to get rid of the First Amendment, to make it more in accordance with the Catholic view of society. And I think what we are seeing, and we've got to thank our Supreme Court over here to a degree on this, and guys like Justice Thomas, who was a Catholic, we have to thank him because what they're doing is they're very wisely in the decisions from Dobbs and other decisions last year, decision dealing with religious liberty, they're pointing the arrow back to when our society, the American society, began. And the American society began before the U.S. Constitution came into being. There was an American people before the U.S. Constitution. And everybody knows what a people need in order to grow and prosper and continue to exist and develop. Everybody knows that. This is well accepted. If you look at, and I've got it up on my screen, if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, as you look at that as written, that's a pretty good statement of what societies and cultures need. So getting back to your question, you've got to pursue just causes. You've got to lead an upright life. And you simply cannot go along with the powers of the day. You have to do what's right and bear the consequences of it. And sometimes you're all alone when that happens.
Yes, I mean, in principle, it's kind of living not by lies, which I mean, I'm making the reference to one of, another Christian apologist, well known, Rod Dreher, who right now is Orthodox. I don't think that's the point. But in general, the idea is to live not by lies and to practice law not by lies. I mean, if you're Catholic, If you are a lawyer, then you try to live both according to moral law and, to try to uphold that moral law, even if you have to deal with some of the consequences, rather gruesome, of human law. So in that sense, I get your point. However, I mean, this is something I would like to ask you more, since you're already in the United States. You know the environment better than me right now. What is how to put it? What is exactly the state of things for Catholics in the legal realm in the United States? What are the challenges? What are the main influence you're like currently seeing in our circles? I know that Professor Adrian Vermeule from Harvard is well known in our circles,
Yes.
and for like Vermeule, he's an academic. He doesn't practice. In your case, you have written books and you write op-eds every now and then, and you practice, which is, for me, it's more interesting than someone who is just merely in academia. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, if you're practicing, if you're promoting certain Catholic and Christian causes in your practice, what do you think are the main challenges you would have as someone who is practicing as a lawyer in your profession and as a Catholic in your life?
Well, like you said, I'm in the trenches. So if people find out what you're doing, and the Catholic message is not a popular message. Okay. The things I write and I say are not popular. However, I am also competent, I believe, in what I do, and I think it's important for lawyers to maintain that competency. And so you got to know what you're doing. I mean, everybody's going to make a mistake one way or another, but you got to be competent in what you're doing. But I know my messages are not popular. And I know that people see my messages and that I am ostracized as a result of them. They don't invite me over to the Notre Dame football games. Okay. They don't, they say, well, this guy's got a different viewpoint. We don't want it. So this is what you risk when you are a lawyer. Now, if you're trying to raise a family and you're trying, make a living for them, that can be a very real problem, a very real hindrance. And so what you have to know is that you have to know that there's going to be a group. You have to marry wisely to begin with. You have to marry the right woman, and you have to have a group that is going to support you and help you in what you're doing and will stand by you. So the challenges that Catholics face are always the same. It's proclaiming the truth. It's saying that there are fundamental problems with this society and that these problems have got to be fixed, and that the fight is not what they tell us on the media. It's something else. And so as a result, you are going to suffer for that. You're going to be marginalized. That having been said, I have been able to work with people. I've sat on the local art board as a member of the board of trustees for a couple of years in the art league, because, you bring something of value. There is still in America this idea, especially for criminal defense lawyers, that, you can have some really whacked out ideas, but you're still a good guy, because we still believe over here in free speech, the ability to say a lot of different things and let ideas out there. Okay. And so we are still able over here to say these things, provide value in our profession, develop relationships with people, and still have something to say and do in society, and still rise up somewhat in society. Now, some doors are going to be closed to you. The minute you say you really believe in Catholicism, those doors are closed. And some of those doors have to do with, political office. That's going to definitely affect you.
Yes, I do see the point. Even like if there's something quite interesting I've realized, and that is, at least in the Supreme Court, you have a majority of Catholic judges and justices.
That's right.
And yet the practice of, the practice, I'm not going to talk only about Catholic lawyers, but the practice for Christian lawyers in general tends to be quite restricted, especially because elite universities are becoming more and more close to our beliefs. And the alternatives, there's always places like Notre Dame or Catholic University. But, saying Harvard has a different ring to it than saying, Notre Dame. And that's quite a problem for anyone who is outside that. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Right.
Yeah. And for me, it's an issue, because if you try to explain this outside of, the United States, inside the United States, that's a story, because there are different elites who are entrenched into, the system itself. So you know how that works. Outside of that, let's say in Europe, in Latin America, that's a different story, because people don't really think, oh, there's something else, something different than, Harvard, Yale, and the classical liberal universities in both sides, like in either East Coast or West Coast. So when you try to explain that there's a strong Catholic movement, a strong Catholic grouping of people, intellectuals, especially in the United States, they tend to look at us in a weird way. And at least in Europe, that has been quite my experience, in which, I have some friends in Austria, I have my classmates, my friends here in Poland, and they look at me and they understand, why do you think about the United States? We're fighting a different fight. And in the end, it's not really a different fight, because what happens is the US still has influence all around the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And for us Catholic lawyers, that's quite a complicated fight, because you can go to Rome and you can try to do your thing, but most of the big business, most of the important cases are still happening in the US. And you talked about Dobbs, so that's kind of how it works. Dobbs becomes like the blueprint for cases in other countries. I can talk about the Latin American scenario from that, but you get the idea. And maybe that's something I wanted to ask you. And as someone who is like on the trenches, someone who goes to court, someone who takes cases, how do you deal in that aspect, like in that very specific aspect? Because you might be not fit for office, so to speak, because you're Catholic, but then again, you're still taking cases, you're still working. So
Yeah.
Does that really make a difference when you're in the bench, when you have to argue in front of judges or in front of tribunals?
Well, what you do is you study the law, and one thing, and so the law in the United States, is really a set of rules. It may or may not be connected with the natural law, but it's a set of rules. And if you look at how St. Thomas Aquinas defines human law, it is a form of reason. And the U.S. law, in many ways, and I'll call it law meaning rules. U.S. law, in many ways, are rules of reason, which keep public order. And public order is a good that the church recognizes. Okay, but ultimately, the law in the United States is not based on the Catholic religion, or any religion for that matter. And that is ultimately where Catholics are called to take every society, is to base the laws on the Catholic religion. The Catholic confessional state is where we're all supposed to go, where we're supposed to go in that direction, because then we base our laws on God's law through the natural law, and things can work really good for everybody. So when you go to court, you know the rules, you know the cases. We have a little different type setup, than the European countries. We still have the common law, so we got all these cases you got to know. And excuse me. And thank goodness we've got computers that allow us to check the databases, so we can research all these cases and find out what we can argue and what we can't within reason. But we can also reason for changes in the laws and in the rules. And we may lose, but we preserve that matter for appeal. So what we deal with over here is we deal with all of these rules, and we can argue from all of these rules. One thing I always tell every single client, and one thing I tell everybody that I represent or I deal with as a lawyer, you got to tell the truth. Okay? If you're going to get on that stand, you got to tell the truth. It may hurt, okay, but you got to tell the truth. Because if you tell a lie, not only are you going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt other people, but you know what? That's evil. And this is what I tell people. You have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, if that's going to hurt, we better talk about it, because then, you got to talk honestly to your lawyer so he knows what to do. So this is the day-to-day problem that a guy in the trenches deals with, dealing with the truth. Look, in the Federal Bar Association, I'm dealing with some really wonderful people in the International Law Society, okay? They have got their vision of societal organization. These are people I respect. They got their vision. I don't agree with it. I think this idea of human rights is used as a weapon. I think Biden mentioned it yesterday in his conference with Xi, and I think it's used as a weapon. And it has to be right ordered in accordance with God's law and natural law and the community. It's got to be right ordered, okay? Otherwise, you got a bad thing. So, you work and you present your viewpoint and you present things that are good. You present the Catholic viewpoint. One of the things that President Oliveira Salazar of Portugal did, and he did it very well with the 1933 Constitution, is they wrote this Constitution, but, they didn't say, well, the Catholic Church says we got to do blah, 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 blah. They wrote it from a point of view of practice, of people's experience. And they laid it out there. They took language from various encyclicals. They took ideas from various encyclicals and they worked it in there. Now, granted, the Portuguese society is more in line with the Catholic view of society than America is. I get that, okay? But there is an example for us here in America to follow because people are understanding that we are a people. Okay, let's take an example, okay? Let's take an example. So we had this decision come down about affirmative action here in the United States, okay? About whether it's legal to have affirmative action at Harvard and some of these other schools that you talk about. Well, okay, so the decision came down, and what you see in the decision, they say, no, it's a bad idea. It's no longer constitutionally allowed. Of course, it wreaked havoc on a lot of people's lives for about 45 years. And in a way, the businesses and the private parties are still going to try to use this. But now there's a club that can be used against them to keep them from discriminating on the basis of race. But anyway, what came out in the course of the decision is this whole discussion of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. What the United States has always done and understood is that there are different peoples. There are different ethnicities. We understand that. And we have made rules in their benefit as the need be. So that idea is there. That idea is in American jurisprudence. It is in American society. We know there are different peoples. And it's a matter of working with that and making that a real reality for all the different peoples in the United States. The roots are there. The roots are there. There's raw material that we can use, that we can work with, that we can argue. And a lot of times, a lot of times you're not going to win, based on the argument with some of these big cultural, social issues. You're going to win, by suffering. That's how you're going to win.
Yeah, I mean, and the reference to Salazar is quite interesting because there are growing talks, at least in the United States, about regime change, interpreting the Constitution in a more Catholic or like classical, if you don't want to use the term Catholic, perspective, and so on and so forth. And I mean, those people, as you may know them, they are usually well known as post-liberals or integralists. On the other side, there are people who, within the Catholic spheres, are more liberal, so to speak, and they try to keep things as they currently are. I think about like the guys at the Acton Institute or something. And for someone who is on the trenches, what's your perspective of that? What do you think works best? To just keep the system as it is, or to try to, find the Catholic truth in the United States legal system, or to try to reform it so it fully abides to Catholic principles?
We have to reform it. We have to do it through the Catholic principles. And one of the best and most obvious principles is the natural law. And the natural law represented itself with the American people in the common law before there was a constitution. But also the natural law manifests itself with other peoples in this country. We have multiple peoples. So we have to reform the system. We have got to break the power of the powerful private interests of the financial and the economic elites. We have to break their power. The economic sphere must serve the people. It must serve the common good. It's not the other way around. So what you deal with is you deal with Acton Institute, you deal with the corruption of Catholic teaching. You look at you see how they corrupted the school of Salamanca. I mean, they totally corrupted the message of that school. You look at Professor Vermeulen and his what is it, common good?
Constitutionalism, yeah.
Right. Common good. So you look at it, and I've read that book. It's like, there's nothing about, the confessional state. There's nothing really about religion in there. You can't go that far. You can't talk about the Catholic religion at Harvard, because if you do, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to lose your job. Okay. So what you got to do is you put it in terms of the natural law. And the natural law is a good starting point. It's a good way to go. So we in the trenches, we've got to keep talking that way. But also, too, you got to get the prelates have got to get out there. The clerics have got to get out there, and they got to start talking about it. And you got to start getting the rich Catholics talking about it, too. Recently, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal where some Jewish fella stopped giving money to Harvard because they wouldn't support Israel. Hey, wouldn't it be something if the rich Catholics would stop giving money to Notre Dame? If Notre Dame did stuff that was against the faith, that'd be great. But instead, what they do, they build another building and put their name on it. Okay, so this has to be fundamentally changed. We have to change this system because it worked for, I don't know, I want to say about 150 years. It worked fairly well. It was fairly benign. But then this thing started to take off with Everson in 1947. And with Everson, you started to have the liberal ideology applied all the way to the lowest levels. And that liberal ideology has got to be, it's got to be negated. It's got to be viewed for what it is. It is harmful for the people. It gives real power to the powerful private interest. It puts the economic interest first before the interests of the people. That is a precept of the Catholic Catechism. That's a precept of Catholic teaching. Right there is to right order the economic interest to the common good and to properly articulate the common good. And part of the common good is a right ordered culture and this idea of, oh my God, I don't want to be ethnocentric. I don't want to be a racist here, but part of the common good amongst Catholics is this idea of nationhood. Okay? There's a nation of people. Okay? You're part of a nation. Italian, right?
I mean, my case is more complicated. I'm legally Italian. I was born and raised in Latin America. So my nation, I mean, I do believe in the Res Publica Cristiana because I do believe Catholic before any other link I have. And the problem with Latin America is pretty much that. In the United States, you have a collection of different people, pretty much under the civic nationalism of, the Constitution and the Founding Fathers and all of that.
Right.
In Latin America, we have a single people from the Rio Grande to Patagonia who speak the same language, have pretty much the same customs and traditions, and we're divided in that 2 dozens of states. Those are the kind of questions that you really puts in perspective how to apply Catholic principles into both law and political government. Because how do you deal with such complexities that you didn't have until the 17th, 18th century?
Well, you have to see what those complexities were. We have to call them what they are. Those ideas came from the 1600s, and they came from the English and the Dutch commercial classes. And what those ideas, I mean, this is, all these political theorists look at these ideas and they think it's some great political theory. Yeah, it is a great political theory. It gives real power to the ambitious, and to the upper classes and to the commercial classes. That's what we need to understand. And we need to right order that in connection with the nation. This agglomeration of people who come from a similar background, have a similar language, a similar culture, traditions, even common blood, common race. That's what you got. You're right. So the civic nationalism in the United States stripped away all these other little identities that you might have. If you wanted to advance, you had to strip away the fact you were Italian or German or whatever, and you had to get into this American society and go up. I mean, they still had ghettos. I mean, there were still, ghettos and neighborhoods that were Italian and Polish and German and whatever in America. But, you stayed there. If you lived there, you stayed there, and you didn't really have the chance to move up. And so what we have to do is we have to say, look, we're a nation in America. We're a nation with maybe subparts, and there are multiple nations. There's blacks, there's Americans, there's Latins, there's all sorts of different nations. But all of these nations have got to be improved and developed. And this civic nationalism, it may, seem like a good idea, but it has to be put to the service of things like culture and nationality and right ordering economics and providing for the whole person. And you can see this with the decline in the family, where the civic nationalism has been moved, or the civic ideology has been used to break up and destroy the family. And so this has got to be challenged for what it is. And we have to put power where it belongs with the private interest. The people in Latin America, I dare say, I have never been to Latin America, I've been to Mexico, but I dare say, you guys know who you are, right? I mean, I was in Hungary, And I was with the Hungarians. I'll tell you what, the Hungarians know who they are. They got their history. I had people coming up to me who were about 25 years old. And this is like, when was the Hungarian uprising? 60, 70 years ago? 25 years old. They're saying, you Americans left us alone. I'm going, man, you weren't even alive then. But they have long memories. They know who they are. So you got to know who we are. We have a history. We have traditions as Americans that we need to emphasize and build. And you've gotten a full court press from the media, from entertainment, from the powerful private, the rich people in this country. They just want to wipe away this whole identity. We have a great identity in this country. We tamed an entire continent, and it was hard, and we did it. And we got our own customs, and we got our own beliefs, and we got our own system. Even though there's this civic idea, there is still this idea of a people that's very closely welded to it. And there's this conflict in the American heart between the natural law and this ideology, which includes, this civic idea aside from any national, connections. The civic idea has to be right ordered. It has to be put in its right place, which is that if you're going to talk civics, then that's what you're going to talk about in the sense of the government. But the government has got to serve the people and the development of that nation. And so, or nations. Okay. And that's how you have to order it, right order it.
Yeah, sure. But here lies a problem. We can talk about the common good or public interest, which is pretty much the watered down version of the common good. And especially in public litigation, you have a lot of public interest cases. How do you deal with that when public interest can be hijacked into whatever current thing there is? It can be used for diversity. It can be used for, reproductive rights. It can be used for pretty much like everything they want to deal with. And in the United States, this is usually the case when you get high-profile public interest cases up to the Supreme Court. How do you deal with that? In some cases, it can go our way. Let's say, religious liberty works for us because of why? Because right now we don't have control over the story. We don't have control over, the moral foundations because we're not in power. We have to deal with what we have. But in other cases, it works against us.
You need strong leaders with a vision, and they have to have the right vision. And someone has to articulate that right vision. And all throughout history, the Catholic Church articulated that right vision. But right now, it doesn't seem to be doing that in this country. But okay, so the church leadership is not helping. But there are people who do have that right vision, and they have to get it to certain leaders. And I think that you're pretty well aware, having written a paper about how there are breaks in the elites that can allow us to have an actual change in society. Because in societies that are run by the liberal order, as you know, it's the elites who basically run it. It's really not the people. We just kind of rubber stamp what they want, right? So, it's the elites there has to be a fracture in the elites. And they have to come to realize that some have a better vision than others. And that can be very popular with the guy on the ground. That's what you're seeing to an extent with Donald Trump. You're seeing him breaking from the elites, and people, Americans, we're dissidents, man, but we're and that's kind of good in a way, because we know tyranny when we see it, and we're seeing tyranny right now. Okay. And so that's wrong. And we know it. And we want to do something about that. Elon Musk is another guy. He's kind of breaking away a little bit from it. Yeah. There needs to be a critical mass of the billionaires. And once you start getting these people on board with this vision and they get the support of a large number of society, you can start to affect change. Now, it may not be entirely peaceful. There may be some violence, but the violence will be from the tyrants. It will not be by the people who are trying to right order society. We don't engage in violence. Violence is a corruption of the right use of force. And the church has always recognized the right use of force. We can do mass demonstrations. We can protest. We can do mass strikes. We can do all of that stuff in support of, say, what an Elon Musk or a Donald Trump or somebody like them can say in order to change how things have to change. We have to get over this idea that somehow being rich and famous and successful in America is a sign of God's grace. We got to say you got a responsibility. And we are a people and we want to exist. And that's the idea that I think will resonate with people because they're seeing it in their families as their families are being destroyed. So this is the formula that has to be adapted. And we're starting to see the cracks in America now. And so that's why I think your paper is very valuable.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I do get the point. The problem is that when you have to deal with some of these issues, it's easier, and maybe this is something I've realized by reading to other Catholic legal scholars, is that sometimes it's easier to get authority. Let's say
You're breaking up a little bit here.
oh wait, I'm having some issues with my internet. Anyway, it should be back.
It might be mine. I don't know.
Anyway, as I was saying, no, it's definitely mine. I see the notification in here. Anyway, what I was saying is that I mean it's easier to get authority in that case than to get actual power to enforce things. The executive is like the enforcement arm of government, but traditionally in the classical sense, courts and judges are the ones with the authority to speak the law. Like that is literally what jurisprudencia means in Latin. The spoken justice. So maybe the strategy for Catholics, especially and Christians overall, would be to try to get as much authority as they can. And I mean, the composition of the Supreme Court in the United States reflects that because you have so many Catholics, as justices. I think I don't think the
You're breaking up.
Samuel Alito and Amy.
You're breaking up. Let me say, yeah, you have Catholic justices. You got 6-3. So you would expect the Catholics to legislate from the bench in accordance with
what do you
the
think
Catholic
is the right
faith.
take on that?
I'm sorry? You broke up there.
Worries.
Let
I'm
me
just
try.
having some issues with my internet. Just give me a sec.
Let me say something. In America, we got this idea of federalism. So in this idea of federalism, excuse me, what you have is this idea that the states can kind of run their local practices, their local things, what's going on. They got responsibility for morals, police power, all that stuff. So what you saw with Dobbs and with other decisions is this idea of let's return to federalism, let the states sort that out. But also, too, the court went back and said there's an American people. These were the customs and traditions when we started. That, I think, has got to be our starting point because those customs and traditions, as set forth in the common law back in the 1770s, 1780s, were actually very strongly Christian. Now, maybe it was filtered through England and that Protestant heresy, but still, those ideas are still there. And that is what the court is pointing us back to. And that's why you're getting so much resistance against the court, especially Clarence Thomas, who's writing these opinions, because they don't want us going back to this idea of a people. They have to destroy this idea of a people and of a nation. And like I said, there are multiple nations in the United States, and they're all entitled to development. And the best people who provide a framework for the common good and that development is the Catholic teaching. So once again, the Catholic justices, 6 on the Supreme Court, can pull a Salazar. And they can take a look at what the church has written and said, hey, you know what? These are good ideas. Why don't we put this into the language of the Americans and say, this is good, and let's make this work. They can do it, and other people can do it.
Yeah, well, I barely managed just to hear the last part because I had some internet issues. But I get the point. And I mean, I am critical of that, not because it is not a bad it is not a good idea. In fact, it is a good idea, and especially because when you have control over institutions, you can actually exercise power over those institutions and overall society. The problem is that I have seen what happens when you don't have the right people in the institutions that hold the most power. My thesis when I graduated from law school in Ecuador, in Latin America, was pretty much about this topic, but from the other side. What happens when you have liberal justices over a pretty much all-powerful institution like the Constitutional Court. So, I mean, I do see the fear that people who are not in our line would have, or Catholics just using the power they have as justices of the Supreme Court to try to put like a Catholic understanding of the Constitution and of law in the United States. However, what happens is that liberals are not going to, shy away from doing that if
No.
they get their majority, and they already try. I mean,
No.
just look at what happened since Biden confirmed that new justice in the last year or so.
The liberals, the plutocrats, these people are determined. I mean, they're determined, and this is a failure of folks on our side. I mean, they think, that if you just like jibber jabber and you vote a certain way, it's going to be okay. No, you got to have cohesion, and you got to have determination, and you got to be willing to suffer, but you got to have a vision to begin with. You got to have a vision. You have to articulate a vision that resonates. And that vision that resonates is going to start with saying there is a nation, there's an American nation, Black nation, Latin nation, etc., in the United States, and they all need to get properly developed, and we need to properly order society. And that means, we had laws in this country, and that's why a lot of decisions in the Supreme Court just have to get struck down. I mean, Burston's got to go, Everson's got to go, all these decisions got to go, and this court has laid the way for doing it. And if they don't strike these things down when they got the chance, what they're doing, one of two things is going to happen. Either the society will just slowly die, or what's going to happen, actually three things, or there's going to be the billionaires, the leadership is going to be a break, like you've documented. There's going to be a break among the elites, and there's going to be some kind of struggle. Or what you're going to get is you're just going to get anarchy at the local level. You're going to get just attacks by the people who are being crushed. They're going to finally figure out they're being crushed, and they're just going to attack. And it's going to create more anarchy and more division and more confusion and more crackdowns. And, quite frankly, the elites are probably hoping for that. That's why we need leadership and a vision.
But do you think there's a chance for that kind of leadership in the United States? I mean, of people who are from our circles, at least, lawyers, Catholic, more conservative. The one I think of was DeSantis, but Ron DeSantis as governor of Florida was fairly effective. But I don't think he has, the strength to go to the presidency, especially right now. And Trump seems pretty, on track on what he's trying to do.
No, Ron DeSantis is weak. He's really weak. No. I mean, he had an opportunity to tell, I think it was Griffin, the billionaire, to tell him to go pound sand. Griffin said, "You better change your stance on culture issues." I think it was Ken Griffin. And he didn't say it. He should have told Ken Griffin to pound sand, but he didn't. He's not a leader. He can't do it. So you got Donald Trump. Are there other people? Yeah, there probably are. I don't see him. I don't know him. Okay. But there could very well be other people out there who are going to rise up to this challenge. We have to articulate a vision, and we have to have a vision that resonates. But something too, I've studied the Taliban, and I've studied, what because that was an ethnic conflict, okay, and it was under the aegis of or the name of the Taliban. This is the way the Pashtuns always dealt with social viruses, and liberalism was a social virus that they fought with in Afghanistan, and they won. Okay, and what they do is they get this religious hyper religiosity in the form of the Taliban. Okay, but it's really the Pashtuns. Okay, and the Pashtuns are in Afghanistan and they're in Pakistan. Okay, and so the Pashtuns fought, but and this is a long way getting to what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is they took losses. Okay, they suffered. All right, they understood the value of suffering, and their leadership took losses. Okay, horrendous losses. Okay, one after another. They died. They were killed. In America, you suffer losses differently. Okay, you get marginalized, you get sued, you get thrown in jail, you lose all your stuff. Well, you got to have new leaders who are going to step up and are going to continue that fight, no matter what. They bring lawsuits, they break it. You just have to keep going. You just can't stop. And it's very hard because in this country, we've kind of learned to we want to collaborate, we want to get along, we want to play with the system. But, you got to be willing to suffer for the vision. You got to be willing to do the protests and do a lot more if you're going to affect change. It helps to have elites too.
Yeah, that's certain. Well, Catholic leadership in the church is not really helping in political and the civil sphere. I don't think we have many figures voting. I mean, Europe is interesting because, as you know, we have Poland and Hungary that are kind of spearheading this conservative revival, to call it a way. Well, I mean, Hungary is really well liked by likes I don't know, Tucker Carlson and some commentators in the U.S. Poland, they don't talk that much about that, but I know I live in Poland. I like Poland, a very Catholic society. The government has some issues when it comes to economics. They tend to not really care as much about the common good with inflation. But overall, I mean, it works well. Poland works well as a society. Maybe it has to do also with the lack of ethnic tension that you see in the United States or you may see in Latin America. But I mean, it is as Catholic as it can be. Now, I was thinking about something else, which is working with the system or against the system. And lawyers in the United States, I mean, they have to belong to the bar association of their state in order to practice. But there's something about the bar association and the bar associations in general is that they are the prime, pushers for certain ideas of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And with all of that, it comes gender theory, like critical race theory, and whatever. How do you deal with that when you're a practicing lawyer? Because they try to push you that all of the time, and in law schools, it's kind of the same. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, this is what they're doing. They're culling the herd. Okay, and so what people are doing, they're paying lip service to DEI. They're navigating this issue. Okay. The people who overtly oppose DEI and do it in a bad, ugly way, well, they're going to get marginalized, okay? Everybody else who doesn't do it is going to watch that, and they're going to keep moving up to the system to a degree, to a degree. What you have to understand, again, is what DEI is. It is something which is not based on merit, which the American system was always based on, but it is also something that targets groups because they're groups and it attacks groups. And so what you're really dealing with is a shrinking economic pie. Okay. And what you're really trying to say here with DEI is we're going to keep strength at the top, power at the top, control at the top. We're just going to limit who can get up to us. A lot of them aren't even going to be qualified, but that's okay. We're going to control it up here at the top, and people will get up there from various ways through entrepreneurs. Because you're seeing the guys with real power in America are the entrepreneurs. They're the business guys. Okay. The DEI affects the institutions, the various professions, whatever there may be out there. But this is in large measure, these people who work through, corporations and law firms and institutions, in a lot of ways, they don't necessarily come to run society, at least not from the boardroom. Some of them do, but it's the entrepreneurs who you see with the real power now. The Elon Musks, the Bezoses, these guys, they've got the real power. And then, of course, the institutional investors, the financial people, they're the ones who have it too. So, and the economic interest. So what the DEI does is culls the herd, and you have to navigate it. I mean, you can't. I don't think you can promote this stuff. I mean, I don't think you can say, yeah, I'm for DEI. I think you have to say, it's based on the content of people's character and it's based on their ability. And we have to widen the pie, increase the pie, and allow all peoples of all nations to be able to advance and to improve their status and to develop their society and their nation. And then we shouldn't worry about this DEI stuff. So it's a two-pronged approach as I see it. And let me say something about America. I mean, America is a very comfortable place in which to live. Okay. You can make a good living. I heard somebody the other day was saying 800 million people want to come to America. Everybody wants to come to America. That's why the southern border is open. They're pouring in to the tune of 11,000 a day. Okay. Because this is a wealthy, comfortable society. Law and order, for the most part, rules. I mean, you go to New York and you go to Portland. Yeah. Okay. It might be a little different issue, but most people in the United States live, out in the country. They live away from these big centers, and they have comfortable, good lives, and they can lead peaceful lives. They don't have to deal, with artillery shells coming in or with people with really radical ideas fighting in the streets, literally fighting in the streets like we saw in the summer of 2020. So for the most part, America is a very peaceful place, and people just want to negotiate their differences and lead their lives, okay? But what's happening is you got the elites who are sifting the people, who are basically not acting in their best interest. And so these elites have got to be brought in line, and we need people with the right vision who can implement that vision, who can break the power of the elites. But when it comes to DEI, I mean, you're talking about promoting people who are based on their nationality, who are based on something that they don't control. Now, a lot of those people do have talents, okay? And what you're creating by implementing DEI is stress between the different peoples. You're creating a new and a different people in the process, but it's ultimately, very unfair. And I think you have to speak up and say, we need to expand the pie, and we need to just simply give more possibilities for more people of the different nations. And that's what we have to do. But I'm telling you too, what's happening, people are seeing DEI as something they got to negotiate, in order to keep their jobs and advance. So they're going to pay it lip service because people don't have a vision. What's that saying from a Bible saying, people suffer for want of a vision, or people suffer for want of education? Well, they don't have another vision of how things can be. They don't understand why this is happening. And so that has to be presented. And I hope I present that vision with you and others too.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think this is something of an issue outside of the United States because, well, in principle, the legal profession is very changing. I'm trying to write about that. I have like a paper I haven't finished about that topic, especially comparing the Latin American the Polish system and the United States system of the legal profession. And in a sense, I think that the main problem does not come from the profession itself, but the way from the profession has developed, especially since there's a path from education to practice. And maybe I wanted to talk about that kind of at the end because you're also a university professor, or you were at some point, and you have taught a couple of courses of law at the university level. So I want to ask you, what's your experience trying to teach that as a lawyer, as a Catholic, to people my age? Because I'm still in law school, even if I'm already a lawyer back in Latin America. I'm learning American law, Polish law, French law in here.
You're way ahead of me. You're much smarter than me, Ugo. You're learning all these different laws. I mean, I just learned one, the civil, the common law. That's it. You're way ahead of me. You're going to be teaching at big places someday, maybe even Harvard.
If Harvard ever returns to sanity.
Well, you're going to bring them to sanity. You're going to get in there. You're going to say, look, we need to talk about this Catholic thing. This is a wild idea. Let's talk about it. But we'll talk about it in different terms, and we'll talk about it. And I think this is part of Vermouli's approach. We're going to talk about the common good, this idea of common, but you got to ground the common good, in the effect, at least of religion on it, and at least Catholic religion. You're bound to do that. Dignitas Humanae tells us that we have to do that. I mean, we're going to suffer for doing that, but, we have to also bring that out. And there's a way to bring it out, like I said, without, being overtly, offensive to people, but I mean, there's a way to bring that up, but you got to at least mention it. You have to talk about it. You have to say there's a Catholic vision, there's a Catholic idea, and we need to examine this and see how it worked. Okay, so what teaching, what I found is people, the kids were smart. I mean, this has been, I don't know, I'm trying to think, it's been about 10 years since I taught. They were very smart. They were inquisitive. Some weren't so smart. Some weren't so inquisitive. They wanted to know how things worked. They were interested. And I found it actually very rewarding. I recommend people to teach in whatever capacity they can. Teaching is a leadership role, and you have to lead. We need leaders who are brave and who are willing, to work for, struggle for, and if need be, suffer for the truth. And then we need leaders to follow after them. So you have to keep the leaders going. I found the kids that I taught, and they were all ages, to be very, very much attuned to what was going on and very interested in how the system was set up and how it worked. And so I was glad to be able to teach all those years.
So, what subjects did you thought? I think I saw on your website something like American constitutional government and as well like civil procedure, criminal.
It was constitutional law, American constitutional law, and then it was federal criminal procedure, was business law and employment law, and then there was a law on just criminal justice in general. There was a course on just criminal justice in general. But the constitutional law one I kept teaching year after year, and that was pretty fascinating because you see that with the U.S. Constitution, without the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution was basically the development of a platform for the to establish a financial system and an economic system that tied the different peoples of America together, the different states, the different colonies together. And it was very smart in that sense because you needed an economic system that was strong and resilient, and you needed a government that was able to protect this whole thing. And so that's what the original 7 articles did. And, it came in the context of a very commercial society. You were dealing with very commercial people who were very intent on making money. I mean, making money is in the DNA of Americans. I mean, that's how we started with the British coming over. This was a way to make money to get to Cathay, and they had all these different ideas like the stock company to make it happen and so on and so forth. And then, they had plantations and they had farmers, they had honey, they had all different type of industries. And so America was a reaction to the mercantilist system that the British imposed, because the mercantilist system is where I get a lot of flack. The mercantilist system was crushing the American people because the Americans simply could not make the specie in order to pay the taxes. They basically had to steal from the Spanish, and their trade was grossly restricted on key areas. The Quebec Act cut the Americans off from the fur trade. Well, I mean, that was very profitable. I mean, come on, man. And then the restriction to push west was another thing. But also, too, what you had, too, with the Tea Act is you basically had the English government coming in and saying, we're going to destroy all your industries and let the East India Company market directly on your shores. I mean, it's like Standard Oil 100 years ago coming over here and getting rid of all the independent retailers and wholesalers. That was a catastrophic move. I mean, and the colonists knew this, and it really wasn't so much taxation. To an extent it was, but I mean, they had to pay these taxes, with money they didn't have. But that really wasn't it. So the Americans, we pushed back against that, and we had a more individualized ethic, a more commercial ethic. And this is found in the U.S. Constitution. And you have to understand, you have to look for it. The protection of contracts, the protection of property, all that is essential, to this idea that we have this society which is based on the commercial. And see, the challenge of Catholics is to say, that's great, that's important. This is a lot of good things that you're bringing out here, but this has to serve the people. Okay. And we have to look at who we are as a people, and there are multiple peoples. And so we have to serve those interests. And the people who really are important in this regard have got to be the civil leaders to help us and guide us. And hey, we love what you guys are doing in the entrepreneurial area. You're doing great work. Keep it up. But you're going to serve us. You're going to serve us, the people. And that's what we need in America. And that's going to be a real push. But right now, that's the best way I see to do it.
Yes, I mean, this is something that is not really well understood among conservatives in the United States. Maybe in Europe, there's some sense from that. I mean, Europe has a better Christian democratic tradition, lots of influence from both Protestants and Catholics. But in the United States, that is not really well understood. So you have always these ideas that, everything is kind of subsumed to a business. And maybe, I mean, I'm like fairly free market guy. But when you see some of the worst takes of the free market, people who are like hard Reaganites and whatever, you begin to understand what the problem is that they don't understand there's something else outside the market, outside, the purely economic or financial aspects of society. And at least when you look at the problems that we're dealing with, you begin to understand that not everything is about economics. I mean,
No, that's right.
Sure, markets are tools.
Yes.
I mean, they need to serve a better purpose. They need to bring prosperity to the people.
I grew up, I mean, I'm 66 years old. I grew up in America in the 60s and in the 70s. And we really were homogenous as a people. There was this sense of dignity, this sense of respect to each other, this sense of, it wasn't all about money. It's like we have a sense of respect towards other people. Now, the elites may not have had that, but in large measure, the society had that. And we treated each other with respect. It wasn't always about the dollar. It was about helping people and collaborating. I mean, that's doable in this society. What we've seen happen in America is a relatively recent phenomenon. I take it back to Everson in 47. And what you see is this breakdown and this extreminization of all these ideas that have been in the American past to serve a certain few. What really helps is if you get a group of people with a very common message, like the Catholic message. It would really help if the Catholics in this country would get their act together and really say the same thing, which is the right ordering of society, which is contained in the Catechism. I mean, it's very plain to see. And if you want to know that more, you just study the Catechism more and quit selling out. The Catholics just need to quit selling out. They just need to just stand up there and preach the truth. And the prelates have got to hold them there, and they have to craft this message that everybody's on board with and present this image, this vision over and over again. And I think it'll resonate with Americans. And there's definitely some historical precedent because you understand there was the common law, which was largely English and Catholic and canon and ecclesiastical, that was in this country and informed much of this country on the local level well into the 60s and 70s. Okay, that was still there. And that was whittled away little by court decisions and so on and so forth. So it's a matter of getting back to it. And the court has helped us point that way back. So we have to get a common vision, a common message. We need leaders. We need to break up. I mean, it's a lot to do, So, I mean, I think you and I can come up with a good plan probably in a couple of weeks. And we just need to recruit a few people and we can make it happen. We start with getting you into Harvard.
That would be interesting, although I am not sure that could work out, especially because, I mean, there's some bias against us. And I can tell you my story because I applied to a couple law schools in the US before coming to Poland. I actually came to Poland because my university here and the universities I study with outside of Poland have like special cooperation agreements. But the thing is that I tried to get there, and somehow what really like turned them off was the fact that I mentioned not only that I was not like American, I had to mention, for pandering purposes. Oh yeah, I'm both Latino and Italian and whatever. I'm also Catholic. I always mention on my applications I'm Catholic, and I realized maybe they don't like us that much, especially
I
in
don't think they do.
institutions. Too. I mean, I tried applying to a couple Ivies. I applied to other good universities like George Mason. They have a fairly good law school in DC, and I thought, all right, their law school is named after a Catholic jurist. Maybe they'll like that, Maybe they will live up to Scalia's name. Turns out that I don't know if it's the fact that I'm foreign to the American, I studied American law, and I have been to the United States quite a couple of times. I lived and studied there as well, doing research. But there's something about those foreigners that maybe the people they get in are always, not conservative people. The people they get from outside of the United States, they always tend to be very liberal.
Yeah.
They even have to get me in because I'm already European.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
weird.
sure.
It's weird. I am, I am on that weird space in which I don't know what really is going on with some institutions in the United States, especially when you try to be vocal and you try to respect and promote certain American values, even if we're not American. In my case, at least.
Well, we I mean, what you're talking about is there's a group of thinking, a group of people who are being pushed aside and marginalized more and more. And so, where does that lead? I mean, it leads to a point where there's going to be conflict at some point. And how that conflict will develop, I don't know. But you need leaders in order to tell these people, you're valuable, you have a valuable message. Let's get this message out there. This is the vision for where we're going to go. So that is something that we're witnessing. We're seeing this stress in the United States. We're seeing this suppression of certain viewpoints, and that's been going on to an extent. But that doesn't mean that we don't stop. That means we keep getting out there. We keep talking about it. I'm saying the Catholic Church would really do well if it would just kind of get its message together, and they would always get out there and say the same thing. But I know that's not going to be popular with the elites. So where we're going is, ultimately, people have said this. We're going one of two ways. You're either going to a massacre where people are going to be destroyed, or what you're going to have is you're going to have a situation where there's going to be conflict between these two different groups, and there will be a lot of problems as a result of that. And that conflict may very well, be violent conflict. So this is kind of what you're dealing with in America, and it is a troubling time. I think foreign powers are taking advantage of this, and I think that it's going to hurt a lot of people. Don't know if I lost you. Don't know what's going on here. It says I'm in the show, but I don't see you anymore, Ugo. But I don't know if I'm being watched or not here. But one thing we have as lawyers in America is still this idea that we can advocate for change. We can advocate for whatever change there is. Now, maybe there can't be some civil sanctions brought against us or criminal sanctions for that. But if we're advocating properly and legally for change for the better, we're within our rights as lawyers to do that. We have that ability to do that. We're not supposed to have our viewpoint suppressed. What has happened since the COVID-19 situation and the Trump elections is that we're starting to see the government work more closely with the social media. We're run by the entrepreneurs or the powerful private interests or the elites or the plutocrats, as I call them, and they are actually suppressing, these points of view. And so, our real enemy here is it's not really the government; it's the powerful private interests. It's the guys who made a lot of money. It's new money and a lot of money. They want to control the situation, and they don't want people coming together. And so that is who we have to understand, and we have to target for conversion and to win them over to our way of thinking, and for defections too that can break apart this power, and we can have leaders from that group who can help us to advance the right vision for our people. But we need a message and a vision that will resonate. That message and vision is something that talks about the people, who the people are in the best interest of the people. And that's based on the family and also the larger family that we have to also talk about, which is the nation. All right, Ugo, don't know where you are. Don't know what's going on. Everybody can see and hear me, but I don't see or hear you. And let me know what you want to do. Send me a message. I don't know if there is a way to communicate on this. Maybe there is.
Sorry,
here you go. You're coming back. You were coming back just in time.
Internet connection.
Just in time, sir.
Yeah, no worries. I pretty much missed all of what you were saying, so yeah, that's on me and my really bad internet connection. But I mean, maybe I can rewind a little bit everything about this. I mean, the point of being Catholic and especially of practicing law these days is that you have to deal with, opposing powers, and you can find them both in court, you can find them in institutions, you can find them in academia, and for us, I mean, so that's kind of very in nature, both as lawyers and as Catholics. As lawyers, because law is pretty much a struggle. The struggle between power and justice, the struggle between opposing sides, the struggle between what's right and what's written. And as Catholics, this struggle to try to overcome sin, to try to become more like Christ, to try to carry a cross. So maybe that's really. I'm sorry I missed your comment on my last question, but yeah, I can try to rewatch it again.
See, we have good internet over here in the U.S.
Yeah, I know. I know. I miss that from the US. I live with, it's one of the struggles of being a Catholic and living among Catholics in Poland, not having great internet sometimes.
Well, I mean, being a Catholic, you got to stand up for the faith, which means you got to live your life upright. Okay, so you got to live a moral life. Okay, you got to tell the truth. You can't fornicate. Okay, so on and so forth. You can't cheat people. It's the Ten Commandments, but we also have to take a look at things larger than us. And we have to be interested in things larger than us. I grew up in a Catholic family. I grew up, with this ethic of you're supposed to do good and you're supposed to make things better. Okay. And so this ethic was always with us. And my parents gave this to me. I learned it in the Army. You always do right. You always do good. And to a degree, I even got it at Notre Dame, though Notre Dame took our faith. But still, to a degree, you got this sense you got to do good. You got to make things better. Well, you got to make things better. When you have the problems like you got, where the family's being redefined, when you got the problems like you got people discriminated on because of the color of their skin, because they're white or whatever, you got situations that you've got to deal with this. And you have to properly right order it in the greater framework of existence. Okay. And the Catholic Church has everything. The Catholic, let me rephrase that. The Catholic religion, okay, has everything. It goes from the macro to the micro, okay, to the personal, okay, and that's what you got to integrate in everything that you do. But we have to understand what's going on, okay, and I think it begins with an understanding what the liberal order is. What's it about? It puts real power in the hands of a few, of the plutocracy, as I call it, okay, and that plutocracy has got to be checked because they're hurting the people, and we're seeing it most immediately in the family. The family is being redefined, and you're seeing breakdown of family. Even despite that, though, the family's still holding up in some areas. Okay, but we got to allow all the families to prosper. And again, the Catholic religion offers this blueprint for how the society can be. And as Catholics, and as Americans, and as Italians, and as Polish, it behooves us to listen to this organization, which has been around for 2,000 years, with this wisdom of 2,000 years of collected wisdom, okay, and success. It behooves us to look at that and implement that and figure that into our lives, however we can, and give expression to it on the micro and in the macro. And so we part of Catholicizing America is to recognize that there are nations here and that the nations are good, and that the American people are good, and the Black people are good, and the Latins are good, and all these different peoples are good, and they need to be properly developed. And economics has got to serve the common good, not the other way around. Okay. And so we got to come back to these ideas that were understood, okay, understood at the formation of this people, at the formation of this country back in the 1700s. We got to come back to these ideas. We have to recognize these ideas. We have to recognize who the problems are. And look, the liberals and the plutocrats aren't going to go down easy, okay? They're not going to like what we're doing. So it's called persecution. It's going to be isolation a lot of ways in how we're persecuted. But we persist, and we keep speaking the truth, and we keep providing an alternative vision, and we keep looking for, as you so well said, those elites who want a better life, a better existence for their own people. Okay, that's what we keep looking. We keep working. It's a constant struggle, and we want to do it peacefully, and we want to do it non-violently, but we want to do it, and we want it done. And if we have to get 300,000 people out in Washington, D.C., or 1 million people, like they got 1 million in London. Was it 1 million in London? They doubled from 300 to 500,000. If we got 600,000 out marching for these ideas, okay, that's what we're doing. We're going to take a general strike. We take a general strike. You're in Poland. Well, how did they do it? How did Lech Walesa do it? They struck. They beat them up. They threw them in jail. Okay, people suffered. Okay, but they believed in the vision, and they had solidarity.
Yeah,
they had
that's quite right.
unity. They had unity.
In Poland, there's a lot of remembrance.
This is a bad connection. We need to get the American internet over there.
From the solidarity movement. Yeah, I know. But I was telling, in Poland, there's a lot of remembrance for the solidarity trade unions and for the solidarity movement, and that kind of coincides with the arrival, like the return, or the presence of Pope John Paul II here, and how they struggle against communism together, both trade leader Lech Wałęsa and John Paul II. Makes sense for Polish people, to stick around their Catholic identity. But in Latin America, well, Latin America was the first victim of liberation theology and of Christian Marxism, to call it some way. And then in the US, you're beginning maybe to see some of the worst results. And for someone who is like very, I'm like, the Nazis are very kind. That is not working. And maybe it's my biggest issue is, yeah, we have all of this great tradition, we have the right ideas. The church is pretty much, I mean, there must be something divine about the church to stand so many years after so many enemies and with such, at some points, it cannot be something human. But then again, what really goes from this, especially in places like the US?
Well, the church has to maintain a discipline, and the church has failed in large measure to maintain that discipline. The church has become like America, I guess, like America in a way. I mean, it's at least in America of the late last century. It's become this liberal haven where you can say and do whatever you want, and nobody seems to want to enforce doctrine or rules or discipline. And that's the perception of a lot of people. That's why a lot of people are leaving. I love my people. I love my country. I work hard in my profession. I stay upright. And this is the beginning. This is the beginning of effective change in any society. And we have to understand, we have to have a sense of solidarity with our fellow people. And I know I'm an American, and so I know who the Americans are. And so, unfortunately, this idea of solidarity is kind of been lost in large measure in the church. I mean, from what I'm seeing, I mean, there's still some pockets that's very strong, but this is the common message the church has to put out, that we have solidarity with our fellow countrymen, with our fellow people, and that we seek the betterment of our people, and we stand in unity in effecting change. And what you have, unfortunately, is you have a lot of people living in liberal societies in Western Europe, Latin America, and the United States, and they're Catholic, and they see the opportunity for personal advancement. And so when they see the opportunity for personal advancement, they're going to build on different markets. And one guy is going to bash one group, one guy's going to talk about something else, one guy's going to do a third thing, and they're never going to be able to get together and articulate a vision and work towards that common vision. One of the reasons the American colonists were so lucky, I mean, not lucky, but so fortunate and so successful, is because they articulated a common vision. Everybody could have hearkened to that against the King of England and others in England, and ultimately it was a plutocracy that they were against. So you have to articulate this common vision for there to be any effective change. And you have to work together and have unity, be willing to suffer and plan and work. But I would like to see the Catholic leadership really kind of enforce its rules and its discipline and sanction the heretics. But we saw that start to break down in the 60s. And I don't know. It seems like they allow a lot of heterodoxy now. So, and that's a problem. And I'd like one last. I'd like to see all these Catholic chatterers. I mean, I talk about Catholic chatterers a lot. Yeah, all these Catholic chatterers, who make money off whatever, YouTube videos or whatever, and they have these businesses where they chatter. They need to all come together and articulate a common vision and push for a common vision for the betterment of the American people. That's what they need to do.
All right. Well, I think it's time. We've been almost like an hour and 20 minutes talking. Sorry for some of the internet connections from my side, but it's been great talking to you. Very insightful, especially because when you're Catholic and when you try to deal with the larger conservative movement, both in Europe, in Latin America, in the US, there's a lot of ideas mixed. Sometimes it's good to see a more straight path that just goes profession, religion. When we deal with when I deal with economics, with law, with politics, there's always some influence from either side. So I have to try to compensate all together. So thank you very much. Thank you for having accepted to be my guest today. And we'll keep talking.
Thank you very much. This conversation went very fast, and I can tell, and talking to you and reading your work, that you are extremely well versed in the issues of the day, and you have got the ability and the desire to make things better. And you, I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. You have that Facebook group, which is great. Classical Conservative. It's a great group. I mean, I think it's a great group, and I like reading it. I'm not. Oh, that's my dog. I'm not as good at reading it as others, but you have the ability, you have the insights, you have the knowledge, the understanding, and you have the practicality. And practicality is a uniquely American virtue. So I think that you have to keep all that in mind, and you can stay grounded in the Catholic faith and the Catholic wisdom that came from that faith.
Right. Thank you very much, and I'll keep that very much in mind.
Well, thank you. Let's stay in touch, and God bless you in your work, and all those that work with you. May God bless you. May God